Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the February 7th, 2013 regular meeting of the Board of Education and call the meeting to order. Ms. Hibbs, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Ms. Ashley?
Here.
Dr. Daniels?
Here.
Mrs. Felter? Mrs. Martin?
Here.
Mr. Parker?
Here.
Mr. Poland?
Here.
Mr. Scheer?
Here.
Would everyone rise for the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we start tonight, I understand we have a special guest in the audience. Connor Williams from Troop 201, I believe, is here. Connor, could you stand up so we could say hello? Thank you for coming. Are your parents here? Thank you for bringing him. Our first presentation tonight is Read Across America, and I believe it will be given by Mr. Kalen Kendall, the president of the Olathe NEA.
Good evening. Yeah. NEA's Read Across America is celebrated every year on Theodore Geisel's birthday. He's better known as Dr. Seuss, and his books continue to bring the joy of reading to countless children. Because it falls on a Saturday this year, we're asking schools and teachers to use Friday, March 1st, to highlight the joy of reading. I think we can all agree reading is the foundation of a 21st century education. But reading is more than just a tool of learning. The amazing thing about reading is that it allows us to peer into the thoughts of another person who has chosen to share those thoughts with an audience. There will be many different ways Read Across America is observed in our district. Our public figures and community leaders will visit some of our schools to read to students. Some of our high school students will visit elementary schools to read to younger children, and in other classrooms, students will be encouraged to spend 30 minutes reading for the sheer pleasure of it. Now, please enjoy a video produced by teachers at Northview Elementary School highlighting some of their talented students promoting reading.
You're never too old, too wacky, too wild to pick up a book and read with a child. You're never too busy, too cool, or too hot to pick up a book and share what you got. In schools and communities, let's gather around. Let's pick up a book and pass it around. There are kids all around you, kids you'll need, someone to hug, someone to read. Join us March 1st, your own special way, and make this America's Read to Kids Day. It's day, it's day, it's day, it's day, it's day, it's day.
And I noticed that my presentation is followed by John Hutchinson, and he likes this hat so much. I'm going to leave it up here because he might want to wear it during his presentation.
Thank you, Kalen. It's kind of funny you say that because I think Mr. Hutchison bailed on our next presentation, so you're off the hook. Next, we're going to be hearing on implementing changes to the nutrition standards in the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. And making the presentations tonight, we have Mr. Scott Kingery, our Director of Food Services, and Ms. Jamie Sokup, the Nutrition and Catering Coordinator.
Hello. So the the National School Lunch and Breakfast program is reauthorized every 5 years. And so the current reauthorization is called the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010. And nutrition guidelines had a major part in this reauthorization. The recommendations were from the Institute of Medicine, and then they were finalized by the USDA. There was a very short turnaround. The guidelines were finalized in January of 2012, and then we had to have them implemented in July. They were finalized in January of 2012, and we had to have them going by July of 2012. So there was a very short turnaround. And this was a big undertaking in a short amount of time. I'm sorry, how do I? Right here. Just to kind of give you a scope of what food services looks like, we have 278 food service employees. We serve meals at 53 different school sites with 21 different menus. And we serve over 4 million meals served each year. The new regulations, like I said, this was the largest nutrition change in 15 years. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we did nutritionally. This chart shows you when we must make these changes, so L representing lunch and B breakfast. The majority of the changes for 2012 and 13 were regarding lunch. They are currently finalizing breakfast, and so we'll be implementing that next year. And they're actually still working out some kinks for lunch too, so we're in anticipation for hearing those. Last year, we had the flexibility of being able to plan our menus. Really, we were able to put wherever we wanted to put foods, we were able to put as long as they averaged out nutrients throughout the week. And this year, we moved to what's called a food-based approach. And basically what that means is that we provide a daily and a weekly amount of food groups. Each, so we, for example, for the fruit group, we provide a daily requirement and then we provide a weekly requirement. The vegetables is similar to that. We provide subgroups on top of the vegetables. So we provide a certain amount of dark green vegetables, red and orange, beans, starchy, and then there's an additional category as well. The grain and meat food group is a little bit different. We provide a daily amount of meats and grains food group, and then we also provide a minimum maximum range weekly. So this was a little bit tricky to try to figure out exactly how much grain and how much meat to fit in to meet the specific ranges. So this took a considerable amount of time with the menu planning. And a lot of times you might see some odd combinations on our menus this year, and that was because we had to try to figure out exactly how to meet those ranges. For the grain group, in addition, half of our grains this year needed to be whole grain, and then as you'll see on the chart, in 2014-15, all of our grains will move to whole grain. Milk didn't really change much in Olathe. Basically, we have to provide fat-free and low-fat milk, and then the low-fat must be unflavored, so nothing has changed there. So on top of this food-based food group approach, we also still analyze our nutrients, and so one of the main things I look at is calories. Whereas in the past, there's always been a minimum amount of calories that we've had to serve. Now there's a range. So we have a minimum and a maximum amount of calories that I have to meet for each grade level. Regarding fat, we have less than 10% saturated fat and 0 trans fats. We have sodium maximums, which the first target will be in 2014-15, where we'll have to decline our sodium by a certain level, and then those targets decrease gradually until the year 2022-23. The menu planning section here is regarding the food-based approach that I was speaking of. Basically, last year we had 2 different ways we could do it. We could do the nutrition analysis or a different version of the food-based approach, and now they've gone to one version of the food-based approach. The age grade groups, basically this just means that the requirements are set in K through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12 requirements, which worked out beautifully for us having those configurations already. The term offer versus serve is something that started several years ago that basically we could do it 2 different ways. We can serve the requirements so that every child gets every single requirement that we're required to serve, or we can offer, and so that means that the children have the choices, and this was implemented to reduce waste. And on the chart you'll see this terminology just means what the student is required to take. So each reimbursable meal must contain a half a cup minimum of fruit and vegetable. And the monitoring section, basically they combine some of our auditing processes, so we're now audited once every 3 years. The menus look a little bit different from last year. Probably the biggest change is that last year the students were required to take an entree, and this year they're required to take a fruit and a vegetable. So the rule is they have to take 3 food groups, and one of them must be a fruit or a vegetable. We've also moved to pre-portioned condiments. This helped with portion control as well as reducing sodium. We've moved to more frozen vegetables versus canned in efforts to continue to reduce sodium. We offer more of a variety of vegetables overall, which is obviously good nutritionally. It's caused some challenges storage-wise at our schools. And you might have heard around the state, there's been videos or around the country of students saying that they're hungry, they're not getting enough food. And actually in Olathe, the calories have really remained the same, very similar. But the entree portions seem a little bit bigger, and that's because of the way I planned the menus. So in the past where I said I had that flexibility of being able to kind of put food wherever I wanted to as long as it averaged out throughout the week, this year to make it easier on students to understand what they needed to get in a meal, each entree contains the meat group and the grain group. So instead of, for example, if chicken was on the menu this year, or last year, this year it might be chicken and rice so that they have those two food groups. That way a student coming through would be able to get the entree, have the two food groups, pick up a half a cup of fruit and vegetable, and that would be a reimbursable meal.
So you can see we had quite a big challenge in front of us. But in the planning processes and really throughout the implementation, we wanted to still have the focus of food services mission, and that's just to provide nutritious meals, appealing meals, and of course we want to make sure that they're affordable, but also to do a really good job of simplifying all of these complex rules and regulations so they would be easily understood by our student customers and our staff. And along with a program this large and trying to implement it, there's a number of challenges, of course. And first and foremost was the short window of time that we had that Jamie kind of alluded to earlier with USDA releasing those final rules in January to be implemented by first day of school in August. And that was really compounded by the fact that the challenge was compounded because this had never been piloted before. There was a lot of questions and clarifications that were needed. And we typically get that guidance from KSDE, but they had as many questions as we did. And USDA unfortunately just didn't have the answers when we were starting out in the planning process. And when they did give guidance, many times it would change in a few weeks or months. So we would have to go back and retool and start over in certain areas. Another challenge was finding entrees especially that met the regulations with the correct amounts of protein and grains. Just as we were waiting for answers to our questions, our vendors, food suppliers were also needing those clarifications of what exactly these nutrition regs meant to them. So, for example, we spent a lot of time trying to find a hamburger bun with the correct amount of whole grains in it until USDA had come up with the clarifications for the bakeries. Another issue that we found is, we found those entrees or ingredients that worked in our menu plan. We bid those products, we purchased them, we went through the first menu cycle, and then we went to reorder, and then we found that the supply chain had been exhausted. Because those items were so unique, school districts from across the country had selected those, and the food suppliers weren't ready for that level of demand. So there were a couple of months initially that we were making a lot of substitutions on the menu simply because the products that we had initially bid and put on the menu was no longer available. But after a couple of months, the food suppliers were able to catch up and meet that demand. And finally, one of the challenges we're still dealing with is the inadequate freezer and refrigeration space, both at the Food Production Center and the schools. Fortunately, the Food Production Center is getting a building addition starting this summer. We're very appreciative of that. That will address those issues at the Food Production Center, but we will still be challenged at the schools. We just simply don't have the floor space in those kitchens to put additional equipment. And that's really driven by the variety of fruits and vegetables that we're now serving that require refrigeration and moving away from some canned vegetables to frozen in order to reduce sodium. The implementation was really just general communication and training. We provided flyers in all the enrollment packets. We also provided that information on all of the August menus. Signage was added to each of the cafes. Some of that was driven by USDA mandate. Others, we produced that signage just because we felt it would help the students understand what now constituted a meal. Training, all food services staff, no matter what position they held, underwent some level of basic training, so they had an understanding of what was going on with all of the changes. But of course, we had several additional in-depth training sessions for our managers and our elementary lunch aides, because they're really the ones on the front line needing to know the in-depth information on the regulations so they can determine whether a meal is a qualified reimbursable meal or not. I think we had huge successes. I think we met our objectives. We continue to offer the nutritious menu like we always have. We always meet USDA nutrition regulations. I think we still offer an appealing menu, and I think that's evidenced by our participation rates maintaining, and we've had very little pushback from the students. Jamie alluded to earlier about some of the things on the media about students not getting enough food. We just didn't see that here in Olathe, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact that we've been making incremental changes leading up to this year, knowing it was coming. So the students really didn't see the big change that maybe some of the other school districts did. And of course, trying to keep meal prices as low as possible. We continue to do that, and we're still able to operate within our projected budget. We will stand for any questions you might have.
You mentioned that participation is maintaining.
Yes.
So we're serving about the same number, or well, probably more because we have more students.
Participation rate is almost exactly the same as it was last year.
Okay.
Scott, could you clarify, Jamie talked about a reimbursable meal and having to have 3 food groups. Do we scan those items so that we have proof that the students have taken 3 food groups? How does that work?
It's a visual. That's part of the training. All of our cashiers, our elementary lunch aides, it's a visual inspection of the tray, and they can't ring it up as a reimbursable meal without having all those components on the tray.
So the student would be asked to go back and get an additional item?
Yes, and there was some of that learning curve early on. We actually had baskets of fruit at the cashier stations, so if a student didn't have a half-cup fruit or vegetable, it was easy for them to take an apple or orange or whatever to add to their tray so they could get that discounted price.
Thank you.
I'm curious on, because of the increase in the vegetables, which is a good thing for the students, how are we watching that in any way? Just because we're providing them more, are they actually consuming more, or are we throwing away more? And if you've got a way to fix that, I've got a 4th grader that needs some help eating more vegetables. So, but are we monitoring that in any way? I'm just curious from that standpoint.
You know, from our perspective, we encourage students to, one, select those fruits and vegetables, and when they don't, even encourage them to try new fruits and vegetables. But as far as sitting there and getting them to take that bite, there really is very little that we can do with that.
Right. But again, that was the whole point of it. Are we wasting more food because of this? And I was just curious if we were even making observations of that.
Yeah,
so
overall, we don't see that. No. Early on, when there was the learning curve of what students needed to have on their tray, them trying new things. There was increased waste, definitely. But we're back to a level of as it has been in the past, and that's something we're very concerned about and always focus on minimizing any waste in any area.
Do we actually measure waste?
Not plate waste. We do measure overproduction, but as far as what students throw away, that's not measured.
Okay.
Scott, you alluded to the fact that there's inadequate storage space, refrigeration space in the schools. I guess I take from your comments that you found a way to manage that, or is that a request that we might see in the future for additional
It would be
equipment?
great. It would be great if we did have the additional space. Right now, great work by our staff at the schools and our drivers. A lot of product comes in cardboard cases. They'll be pulling the individual bags of food out of the cases and sliding them in the corners and slots and just trying to stack the food in every open little crevice in the refrigerator or freezer. So that's how we're working around it right now.
We have some buildings with additional space where we could add equipment, and then we could kind of distribute it throughout the district so that the travel time wouldn't be so...
No, not really. There are some newer schools that have sufficient refrigeration and freezer space. I'm thinking of some newer elementaries. But the older elementaries, there just is not that space. And middle schools are a challenge in themselves, especially the older middle schools. And we're at capacity at the high school. So there really isn't any unused storage space out there that we could feed off of.
I got one last question also. So there's some requirements that are out there into the future, 2013, 14, 15, 17. Is there any anticipation that we would start working towards those before those time frames?
Oh, absolutely. Just as we did this time around, we'll make those incremental changes. Sodium is going to be a huge one. It's under study right now whether or not they're really going to leave those targets in place because they're pretty severe. But if they're going to leave those sodium targets in place, we need to start working toward those right now.
Scott, do you spend any time with other school districts looking at how they operate and best practices and plans?
Absolutely. Jamie, in fact, since she does our menu planning, there's a group of dietitians that meet on a regular basis and trade tips and secrets.
Okay. And at the end of the day, that's beneficial for our students and the menus that we're putting.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's one good thing about school districts. We're not in competition. You know, we share our ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Dr. Berry, I'm just wondering, we have our Health and Nutrition Committee. Has that committee had any role in what's developed at our Food Production Center?
At one time, Jamie, I think, sat on that committee. I don't know if you're still operating with that group or not. So that committee focused more on what was happening out in the schools in terms of healthy snacks and celebrations and vending machines and that kind of thing. But there is a lot of communication that goes back and forth. Okay. We look to Jamie, I think, in the district for a lot of suggestions and strategies for all kinds of whatever it might be in the school, snacks and I know one school doesn't have a carnival anymore. It's sneaks and snacks. It's all healthy stuff. And many times Jamie will have staff there and testing out new lunch food or whatever it might be. So there's a good cooperation with the food services in our schools.
And I actually serve on that committee, and Jamie is always there. And we have students on that committee, and so she accepts input from those students quite often, too.
Anything else?
Is that all? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, we have a K-12 English Language Arts curriculum presentation. And leading that, I believe, will be Ms. Luann Hermrich, our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, Mary Jo Fox, our K-12 and Title I English Language Coordinator, and Mrs. Gail Holder, our 612 English Language Arts Facilitator, and also an English teacher at Olathe South.
Thank you.
We appreciate the opportunity tonight to bring curriculum update to you from Teaching and Learning. There are two topics that we're going to be addressing tonight: the Kansas College and Career Ready Standards and the English Language Arts newly revised curriculum. There are two purposes that this information serves. The first one is really just a brief update for you to alert you to a change in terminology by the Kansas State Department of Education with regard to their reference point for standards, as well as the second purpose served is to bring you background information and to refresh some of what we've shared about the Common Core standards, the K-12 English Language Arts curriculum standards coming forward tonight for Board of Education approval. So let's start first with the Kansas College and Career Ready standards. From this point forward, newly revised standards at the State Department of Education are now going to be referred to as Kansas College and Career Ready Standards. Let's look at a couple of rationale points for the change. When you think about it, all new standards that are coming forward for approval, for future approval, are aligned with that goal of our students being college and career ready. So it's a nice focused target as a label to suggest that a pre-K-12 learning sequence should help prepare all students successfully to be college and career ready, regardless of the choice that students make. So if you look for one logical label, perhaps, to sort of place all the learning standards under college and career ready, would be a label that would send a nice proactive message, if you will, in using that label. The other piece, sort of a rationale that I think we've had questions about. Our teachers have asked questions, and I believe Mrs. Felter addressed a question related to this last month at the meeting regarding the science standards. So let's sort of review the terminology that's out there. Common Core standards refer to English Language Arts and mathematics only. Those have been approved by the state of Kansas. We also have out there, not yet approved, science standards. They're under the label of Next Generation Science Standards. Social studies standards are out there currently under review under Kansas Social Studies Standards. So I think Mrs. Felter's point was, okay, are the Next Generation Science Standards Common Core? So trying to keep some of that terminology. And so this is an approach the state used to begin to start using one consistent label for all standards, rather than trying to refer to the individual standards and the initiatives, Common Core, Next Generation, Kansas Social Studies Standards. So that brings sort of the rationale piece related to that. And just a reminder, as you see on the slides, the only two sets of standards approved at the state level are the English Language Arts standards and mathematics standards. In our district, you have approved the revision of the math standards. We're bringing forward the English Language Arts standards for your approval tonight. So what does this mean for communication? Number one, in our district, as we develop familiarity, any state document we see that references Kansas College and Career Ready standards, we're going to have a time where we link older terminology that our staff is familiar with, Common Core standards, with the new terminology, Kansas College Career Ready standards. So for a period of time, we will tag team both of those reference points for our staff. It's probably likely that communication that you may read on the state website, or that may come to you from the state, or that you're looking at, may include just the reference Kansas College and Career Standards. So now we've sort of given you that alert, if you will, that that is the umbrella label used at our State Department to now refer to any curricular standard brought forward for approval. And as I mentioned, Our next focus topic we are extremely excited to bring forward tonight because it represents a good deal of work by many, many staff members. So I'm going to turn this over to Mrs. Mary Jo Fox, English Language Arts Title I coordinator, as well as Gail Holder, who is 612 English Language Arts facilitator and current teacher at Olathe South. So Mrs. Fox.
Thank you. As I, start thinking about the curriculum revision process, the phrase that comes to mind is the Olathe way. And if you look in your packet, you'll see the template for the curriculum documents, and it's unique to Olathe. It was created to support our teachers with those learning expectations and with understanding what are the key instructional practices they'll need to utilize to support their students. Collaboration is another key word, and teachers from all of our grade levels, K-12, were involved in the study and the writing of the curriculum document. Once a draft was completed, it was then brought to all of our K-5 classroom teachers, all of our 612 English Language Arts teachers, and they provided feedback on it. Their feedback then became a part of the revisions that are included in the documents that you'll be reviewing for approval. Thinking back to what Ms. Hermrich shared in October of 2011, that all of our curriculum pieces, all of the standards are all grounded in research. What I'd like to share with you is the foundational piece for the Common Core standards, and that's the ACT report, Reading Between the Lines. What that identified was what it takes for students to be successful post-secondary. What are those key elements that kids need to possess? And as you're going in, you could see on your screen some of those key pieces. It's that rigor. Kids have to be able to go and deal with complex reading and writing texts and be able to do that independently. Another key area is that relevance. They've got to see what's in it for them and how it's going to matter to them for their success. As you look at the standards, what you'll notice is they're organized into strands, and you'll also notice that they are very comprehensive. As you glance down the list, you'll see some things that you'd be expecting to see. You'll see phonics. You'll see different types of reading, different types of writing. You'll see all of those key pieces for language with grammar, conventions, with the language usage and vocabulary. But you'll also see two pieces that we've always had under that umbrella of language arts, but we've never explicitly stated. And that's that speaking and listening, and then having the literacy throughout the social studies and technical subjects. Now we've got literacy standards for history, social studies, and for science and technical areas, where they specifically lay out what are those reading and writing standards that are needed for students to be successful in those content areas. We talked about some of those traditional pieces that have always been in our curriculum and continue to be in our curriculum, but we've had to have some shifts in there. Those shifts so our kids will be college and career ready. Those shifts so that our students will meet those areas identified in reading between the lines. And one of those pieces, as I mentioned before, is students being able to deal with complex text. And so giving them lots of experiences with that, with literature, with informational text, and poetry. And while they're doing that, really focusing on that academic language and not watering things down. We've always had kids reading and writing, but now it's not enough just to respond just with bravado. Now you really need to go and you need to cite evidence for your thinking. Another key piece that Mrs. Holder is going to be sharing is how it becomes a bigger piece beyond just the walls of the English Language Arts classroom, where now literacy is developed in all of the different disciplines. And this is where a bulk of that informational text is going to be read. And then finally, where we've always talked about integration, now we have to be even more focused, more strategic with our connections with our reading, our writing, our listening, and our speaking, and that technology. I'd like to bring you now into the elementary world and share with you some of the feedback that we've gotten from our classroom teachers as they completed a survey last semester. These are some of the things the teachers had said. Students are able to do much more than I expected. I'm finding myself using more academic vocabulary instead of kid-friendly terms, and they're getting it. Students are learning quickly how to prove their answers. We've seen an improvement in both their comprehension and their writing. And finally, I'm expecting more from my students and realizing they're so capable of it. One of the pieces I feel really great about is just on our first steps out with this new way of looking at things. I believe we truly are building that foundation so our students will be college and career ready. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Holder.
Well, one of the things I know about the Olathe District, not only being a graduate of the Olathe District, but also teaching here for 22 years, is that the high expectations for not only our students, but our teachers both. And it's more than just high expectations for our students. It's that we have put some amazing people in our schools to help students reach their potential. So the burning question is, how are our students benefiting from the revised Common Core College and Career Ready standards? And Mrs. Fox has already alluded to some of those, but I want to give a focus now on that 612 curriculum and what that is going to look like. I think first I want to start with a school-wide focus, and the burden has always kind of been on the English language arts teachers to carry our students in terms of reading and writing and speaking and listening, and now it is definitely a shared responsibility across the buildings of all 612 in our district. First, seeing that increase of those informational texts. What we know about informational text is that it gives us that text complexity that we're really, really looking for. That informational text, however, partners with and runs tandem with in the ELA classroom with our literature, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. Building wide, we're going to see an increase of clear, developed writing. It's no longer okay just to write one or two words and say, there's my answer. Those answers are not acceptable. What acceptable answers are ones that are backed up with evidence, students making a claim for why they feel a certain way, and then not just saying, well, that's the way I feel, but by taking the evidence from the text and plugging it into their writing. And then thirdly, an intentional student-centered discussion in every classroom. The word I love about that particular bullet is the word intentional, because I think that's what teachers in our district are definitely doing. They are making it very intentional. We ask a student a question in our classroom. They say this is the answer, and we say, why? Give me more. What page? What paragraph? Where did you find that? What are you basing your response on? Those are intentional things that are happening in each and every classroom. And the interesting part about this is, this year as I've begun teaching very differently than I've taught for the last 21 years, I have to be very honest. Now kids hold kids accountable. When a student answers a question, a student in the classroom will say, where did you find that? Page that, flip, 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 flip. What paragraph? And they're looking for that evidence where that student just gave that response. It's intentional, and it really, really works. Here's just a glance into my classroom, if you will. I've given you 3 bullets, 3 very classic pieces of literature. And here in just a moment, I'm going to talk about how none of this is going away. I am doing more this year than I've ever done in the past, and I'll give some examples of that here in a moment. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, a classic piece of literature about a society that turns solely to technology for everything, all right? The interesting part about this is that we live in that world, but sometimes our students don't realize that we live in that world. So my job as a teacher is to bring in for them and prove to them, yes, you do live in that world. So I brought in a text, just how many Facebook friends do you need? We did a little informal survey. How many Facebook friends do you have? We had raising of hands. Actually, we all started with 10. We had all hands up, and then we sort of went up the scale. But we talk about the relevance of that and how much time do we spend with technology. Now let's go back to Ray Bradbury's text and let's take these two pieces, let's put them together, let's have an intentional conversation about how these two pieces fit very closely together. Again, creating relevance. Secondly, Julius Caesar, one of my loves, Shakespeare. It's a great piece of literature. I really love it, and sophomores really get into it. They read sort of love and romance with Romeo and Juliet their freshman year, but by sophomore year we're ready for betrayal and all of that. So here we go. But what we did as a sophomore English team is we took each act of Julius Caesar and we said, what's the relevant piece that we want kids to connect to? What's the relevant piece? In Act 4, Mark Antony and Octavius are plotting against Cassius and Brutus, and they each have their own military strategy. We talked about those. Then we bring in Napoleon's Maxims of War and Sun Tzu's Art of War. So now they have 2 additional informational texts, and we look at all 4. And we say, okay, what in your opinion, what do you deem as the best military strategy? And then the next question, why? And back it up with evidence. And then you go further than that and you say, which one is the weakest? Which one has holes in it? And then why? Next, Frankenstein. Of course, a story written by Mary Shelley when she was 19 years old. That's always a key point that I always try to make to kids when we're working through Frankenstein. A very, very complex text for sophomores to get through. But I tell you what, when I tell them that a 19-year-old girl wrote that book, they are all over it. They really want to hear what it's all about. But it's ultimately about one of the themes is a focus on beauty. And it's about a scientist, of course, as you know, that tries to create the most beautiful, the most perfect man. And the reason he turns on his creation is because he does not deem him as beautiful. And so we have real conversations about what that looks like in our society. And we read an excerpt there about the Texas man. And, why would you go through something like that? For the sake of beauty. For the sake of beauty. So as you can see from the examples up here, this is what's going on in every classroom. We're not giving up anything that we're teaching in terms of literature, but we are creating relevance and analysis and evaluation and synthesis by running it tandem with those informational texts. That idea of lifting learning, I had a conversation just today with one of our social science teachers preparing for tomorrow's professional development, where the English language arts departments in 612 will be partnering with the social science departments, talking about the idea of literacy. We want to turn out students that graduate from our schools that are thinkers, that can go into any situation and think and analyze and evaluate and judge and monitor. That is what our ultimate goal is. And that idea of literacy is a school-wide effort. It is a shared responsibility, 612. Finally, 2 phrases that are here are 2 of my very favorite, and I know they are in the heart of every teacher that works in this district. I started out talking about expectations, and expectations is just a word unless you really, really, really live it every day. Not only holding the bar high, but inspiring kids to reach those expectations that you've set. Thank
you. Any questions for us?
Gail, I'm intrigued by your statement that you've changed your teaching style dramatically this past year. I don't mean to put you on the hot seat, but I am going to put you on the hot seat.
Perfect.
What do you mean? What's different?
What's different for me is I think sometimes we hold back on what we ask students to do, and we help them along maybe more than we should or I should have. This year, I don't feel the need to do that. It's okay. The standards let us know that students are going to be challenged, and that's good. We want them to be challenged, and we want them to grapple with very difficult texts, and we want them to work towards completion of that with the support, of course, the teacher in the room. But they have increased their stamina for writing. I no longer tell them it has to be a paragraph. I say write until you're finished. I'm getting more writing from my students this year than I ever have in the past. I've stopped saying 200 words or 3 paragraphs. I say write until you're finished. And those little incremental changes, asking for the whys, asking for the stretch its, telling me the evidence, basing things in evidence has really made all the difference in my classroom. Students come in and quite frankly, not that they weren't always really excited to be there, of course, but you know, they are ready. They are ready to learn. Today we were working with a text, Antigone by Sophocles. It's difficult. I mean, there are scenes that are relatively straightforward, but then at the end of each scene there's an ode that is poetic. And they said they were working in groups, and they kept looking back over at me and saying, can you help me? And I said, tell me what you don't understand. Well, I don't understand this phrasing. What about this phrasing you don't understand? So again, it's that intentional dialogue, getting down to what they think they don't know, supporting just that piece versus me telling them the whole story. Okay, this is about a girl that did this, blah. It's about just supporting that piece and then letting them go back and creating thinkers, letting them work through those parts, those spots, and those parts where they are struggling. Did that answer your question?
That was just the beginning.
That was just the beginning. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Comments, do we need a break or?
What's that? It's up to the board. We need to come back at 7, so I think we're safe to take 2 or 3 more minutes if we want to do that, or?
Got 2 seconds.
Okay.
One thing I've always said about teachers here in Olathe is I wish they'd show a little more passion. Ms. Holder, please show a little more passion next time you make a presentation.
Thank you.
Holder.
All right. Just a couple comments. You know, on the one rationale for change. Basically, the phrase "college and career ready." I just want to make sure that we keep continuing doing this. Just comment. You know. Oh, you're okay. That we continue doing things the quote Olathe way. College and career ready to me has one understanding to me that you know the Olathe way is students prepared for their future, and to me there's a huge difference there because we're missing something if we're just making them college and career ready. The next step is making them ready for their future. If we go back to the basis of first public education, there are 3 legs to it: knowledge, morality, and religion. If we just stress the knowledge part of it, we lose an awful lot in our kids. And so I want to make sure that we continue focusing on the Olathe way of preparing our students for their future, not just in a knowledge standpoint, but in a overall quality of their preparation for life. So I guess that was it. Just want to make that comment, and I appreciate your presentation. Very wonderful.
No, I'm ready to go back to school now. Maybe not. My sophomore has a wonderful English teacher right here, and thank you, and she's really, really enjoying it. I really, Luann, like the umbrella phrase, and if you Google Kansas Common Core, it directs you in under the new terminology. Have you tried that at all? It's just real transparent, and it actually feels better. It feels like we have ownership over it rather than nationalizing it and getting our system hijacked. It truly feels more like truly what it is. It's deeper, richer standards. You said something, Luann, can you clarify? Okay, so the English and the math has been passed by the state of Kansas, so already now it's on the way to having standards developed, correct? Is that?
Actually, yeah, the standards at the state level have been developed, and then it was up to the individual districts to put those standards into a district template so that train the teachers, make sure the teachers agreed, understood the statements. Did they have any questions about terminology in the statements? Did they have any feedback about the statements? Any wording or that sort of thing. And so the standards come forward, individual districts then adopt them. Our math standards were actually adopted in December, and then the English language arts standards move forward tonight for your future approval.
Okay, and then the science standards are still at the state level?
Those are still actually the teachers in the state of Kansas had an opportunity to provide input, about a 3-week window of time to provide input on those standards through the end of January.
And who to? The Kansas Department of Education?
Yeah, actually, it was collected in a variety of ways. The Kansas State Department of Education, there was a website there that information was collected and feedback collected. They worked very hard to try to communicate, please take a look at these, please provide feedback, and we allocated time and attention so our teachers also provided that feedback.
So they aren't approved yet?
They are not.
Will be, okay.
They are not. They're still in input and revision stage.
Okay, and then social studies?
Ms. Felter?
Yes, I know. I hate to make them wait over. They're currently under review, or they're at the state?
Currently at the state level under review.
Okay, got it.
Okay, well, now, I
That's
don't
all
want to
I had.
rush any board members. So do we feel like we're done, or should we invite them back after the break?
I'm done.
Okay, all right. Well, thank
Well
you very
done.
much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
We will take a 10-minute comfort break and convene back here at 7 o'clock.
You'll be 5
Lots
minutes.
to digest.
At this point in our agenda, we will do awards and recognitions. Ms. Felter is going to be accompanying Ms. Maggie Kolb, our Director of Communications.
Sounds good. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be able to share with you some of our recognitions tonight. I'd like to welcome all of our distinguished guests. We're going to begin our recognitions with a community partner. I'd like to ask Heather Schoonover from Community Development to come forward to help with these recognitions. We are proud to recognize the Olathe Police Department as a dedicated partner with the district. The School Resource Officer Program assists in helping our schools stay safe, resulting in a secure learning environment for our youth, staff, and visitors. These officers annually conduct classroom instruction on substance abuse prevention and law enforcement topics, investigate traffic or criminal violations on or near our campuses, and build student and parent relationships through involvement in extracurricular activities. The police department also partners with our schools on gang prevention and cyber safety awareness. Their administrative officers support our crisis management team and work closely with Laverne Fields, our district manager of safety and security. And the school resource officer K9 program provides a passive alert narcotics detention Labrador retriever assigned to an SRO. For the secondary schools, this has proven to be a highly visible drug deterrent, while elementary schools use the program for positive interaction with students through classroom demonstrations. We thank the Olathe Police Department for being a strong partner with the Olathe Public Schools. And now I'd like to ask Chief of Police Steve Mankey, along with all the representatives of the Olathe Police Department who are here tonight, to come forward and be recognized. Thank you for all you do for the Olathe Public Schools. Next, I'd like to recognize a staff member who was recently honored by the state. Would Cody Wilnauer, music teacher at Regency Place Elementary, please come forward along with Principal Greg O'Borney. Cody was recently named a Kansas, actually I'm going to let him come forward. He was recently named a Kansas Cable Telecommunications Horizon Award recipient. This award is sponsored by the Kansas State Department of Education and the Kansas Cable Telecommunications Association. This program recognizes the exemplary work of teachers during their first year in the classroom. Will Nauer is one of 32 teachers from across the state honored with the award this year, and he is now in his second year of teaching. Congratulations, Cody, on this accomplishment. And Cody, is your family here tonight? Because we'd love to stand and have them be recognized as well. Congratulations. Our final recognition tonight is of a 6th grade student who recently received great honors in the 13th annual Celebrate Diversity competition. Would Gabe Felter please come forward, along with Frontier Trail Middle School Principal Rod Smith and District Athletic and Activities Director Lane Green. Gabe won the Best of Show Award in the Celebrate Diversity contest, sponsored by the Olathe Public Schools and the Olathe Human Relations Commission. His entry, a multimedia project, beat out 4,470 entries submitted by 6th through 12th graders from across the district. Entries fell into 3 categories: essay, visual arts, and multimedia. Gabe's entry was a video that he wrote, directed, and filmed himself. The video was entitled Say Something. The theme for this year's contest was the injustice of silence, based on a speech given by Dr. Martin Luther King when he said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And now I'd like to take a moment to watch Gabe's project. Congratulations, Gabe. And I know that you've got family here tonight as well. Love to have your family stand and be recognized in addition. Congratulations.
At each regular meeting, the Board of Education reserves limited time for individuals wishing to address the board. We request that individual speakers limit their comments to 5 minutes. The clerk will monitor the time and notify the speaker when the 5-minute time limit has expired. Please direct your comments to the entire board. If a response is appropriate, the president will respond or refer to another individual. In an effort to respect privacy, we ask that speakers refrain from discussing personal complaints involving individual staff members or students. Those speaking are advised that public comments are videotape recorded for broadcast on the district's Educational Access Channel and audio tape recorded as a matter of public record. Individuals addressing the board should come to the podium at the front of the room and state your name and address. No one has signed up. However, is there anyone in the audience who would like to make public comment?
My name's Mike Round, and I live at 13234 Long Street in Overland Park, and my number is 515-3911. That was really, really good.
Agreed.
I wanted to take just a moment, not to rehash an old issue, but perhaps to learn from it. The bond task force, as I understand it, is just held its second meeting, and one of the things that they're tasked with is, do we need another high school? The bond task force in 2006 said not only do we need a 5th high school, we needed a 6th. The 5th, of course, was used for reconfiguration, and it wasn't built. The equivalent of it, additions to the high schools, were built. So 5 years ago, they said, yes, we need a new high school to address growth. 5 years ago, they said that it was going to be built and operational last year. And so when I saw that they were meeting to address this issue, I wondered to what extent we learn what happened, why it isn't the case now that we have a 5th high school. What can we learn from this entire body of work? One of the things I think that went wrong in 2007 is that there was a call for $350 million. That's what they said was needed. And a survey was done and said, we're not even going to, or the community wouldn't even approve $190 million in 2007. So a bond of 138 million was approved. I think the divisive issue that has made the 5th high school not exist right now is the way reconfiguration was dealt with. And I guess that's the crux of what I wanted to talk about tonight, because I can anticipate a survey going out saying, let's find out what people want, how much they're willing to pay. And that's good. That's, I think, how one gauges the pulse of the community, how much they will, what they will vote for, what support you can get for. And I think support for a second bond in 2008 was limited because of the way reconfiguration was handled. Specifically, I mean that there wasn't really a whole lot of support for it. Nonetheless, it went forward. I think that's probably the reason why there hasn't been a bond since 2008. And so I anticipate the $350 million initial request by the task force, of which $200 million was passed. So there's already $150 million that they'll probably be asking for, plus 500 to 600 kids a year for 5 or 6 years. It's going to be a healthy bond request, I suspect. And if it's necessary, create the educational materials necessary to show people this is what we need, here's the reason we need it. Take people who don't like the high numbers, take them to one of these crowded high schools right now and say, look what we've got right now, and it's only going to get worse, because should this pass, it'll be 4 or 5 years until the 5th high school is built. So I just wanted to address that issue regarding the bond issue, because when I saw that the bond task force was being convened, I thought, this just happened, didn't it? But God, it's hard to believe it's been 6 years. So I guess the bottom line is, if you're going to ask the community their opinions, value them, and if you don't like the result, improve the message at first, so that everybody can make an informed decision. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. We can move along to our consent agenda. We have our standard reports and a couple of trips. Are there any items that board members would like to take for individual consideration? Seeing none, I accept a motion.
Move to approve consent agenda items numbered 5.01 through 5.05 as presented.
Second.
Ms. Hibbs, I have a motion by Mr. Poland and a second by Mr. Scheer. Would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mrs. Felter?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Mr. Scheer?
Yes.
The motion carries. 6.01, authorization for sale of 2013A general obligation and 2013B qualified school construction bonds on March 7th, 2013. Any comments or questions?
I would like us to separate this motion into 2 motions, because I still have some questions about the qualified school construction bonds. I mean, that would be my recommendation, that we separate it into 2 motions, but maybe we can take care of it without that.
I guess I look to Mr. Hutchison. Can we vote on this as 2 separate motions?
I believe we can.
Okay, so Ms. Ashley, would you like to take the general obligation bonds vote now and then have discussion on the qualified? Okay, all right. So if a board member would like to, unless we have any other comments, if someone would like to make a motion for the authorization of just the general obligation bonds, we'll vote on that first and then we'll hold discussion on the other.
I move to authorize the sale of the general obligation, would it be the same date?
Yes.
Bonds on March 7th, 2013.
Second.
Qualification I'd offer to that is that it needs to be, say, what, 2013A, according to the...
Okay. Okay. I move to authorize the sale of the general obligation 2013A bonds on March 7, 2013.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Hibbs, do you have that?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion. Would you call the roll?
Yes. Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mrs. Felter?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Mr. Shear?
Yes.
Miss Ashley?
Yes.
Okay, Miss Ashley.
My first question is that if the motion that is presented here for authorization of the 2013B qualified school construction bonds includes the assumption that there is no established escrow for the repayment of the principal. Is that a correct assumption on my part?
There is an established escrow, but not a straight line escrowing beginning in early years. The escrow does not get funded until the remaining 5 years of the bonds. Correct?
So this motion, as it's presented then, would not allow for any escrow of the principal repayment until 30 years out, and then those funds would be escrowed at an equal amount over 5 years.
It would be, I believe, 18 years out. There are roughly 22-year bonds in the final 17 years out. Final 5 years, they would escrow. However, the board at any time could have a motion to accelerate that escrow. If you try to escrow now, you cannot have a motion to delay that once it's set, but you can always speed that up. That in year 3, 4, 5, the board chooses to begin funding the escrow, they can do that.
Well, herein lies my concern. Who's going to remind the board on an annual basis that this is still out there, that we're not escrowing, assuming that we choose not to, that we're not escrowing these funds for repayment of the debt? And if this goes on until such time as we have to escrow, which you said was 17, 18 years out, I'm going to chance to say that there's a really good chance that nobody up here on the podium is going to be on the Board of Education at that point in time. And I'm just not comfortable with that. That smacks of irresponsibility on my part to say I'm not going to make any provision for the repayment of this principal because I don't have to. You know, the benefit to the school district is that we are getting these bonds interest-free. That's awesome and saving us millions of dollars. But to further say, oh, I'm not going to repay the principal either because I don't have to, I cannot go along with that. And I know we've got some supporting materials here that were provided in regard to some questions that board members had. And one of the statements on here says, and I'm referencing you, our financial advisor regularly reviews our debt portfolio to identify whether we can take advantage of market conditions through accelerating debt payment through refunding or advanced escrowing. I agree with the refunding piece of it because that takes a board decision to do a refunding. But the escrowing, yes, that would take a board decision, but it's not something, it's just hanging out there. There's no other provision for repayment unless we ask for that escrow to start taking place. Whereas with the bond refunding, there's already a payment schedule in place for those bonds.
There, just to clarify, there is a provision. It's just does not begin till year 17. It's not that we have to remember at year 17 to start beginning the escrow. The documents are drawn that way. We'll have to start funding that escrow in year 17. Granted, different than what we currently do, but similar to any other bond issue, it will be stipulated in these documents when that escrow must occur. I assume the trust will contact the district, bill them here, it's time to begin, and we will start putting $3.5 million a year in.
I guess I'd like to hear from those board members who serve on the Budget and Finance Committee as to their feelings on why this is being recommended to the board for approval.
And I'll be happy to speak to that, being on the committee. You know, one of the things that we looked at is we feel that it's very important for the board to have a strategy of how we manage the mill levy here and going forward. And there's very few levers that you can pull to say how do we manage that for now and going into the future. We sat down with John and I'm sorry, Dustin, apology. And we talked about that. How does this look going forward? Because again, we know we've got other bonds coming up. We know we've got other expenses coming up and things such as that. And we said, how do we position ourselves in the future to be able to have as many levers as possible to say, okay, how do we manage it? Because it really is a mill levy strategy. Because again, we look back out to the taxpayers, and my understanding, and this is from a personal opinion, is they would, number one, be great if we didn't have any mill levies at all, if there was no taxes out there you had to pay. But secondly, what we're trying to do is establish a strategy where it's going to be more of a maintain rather than going high, going low, coming back forth. And this is just one of the few levers. It's not a big lever, and we talked about that, but this is just one of the few levers that we can utilize this. If we do the straight line, then we set it in place that we can't do anything with this. This is exactly where it's going to be at no matter what our future decisions are. By putting this and deferring this off, it does give us that opportunity that if we do, and that you're right, we need to continue to remind ourselves in future boards, how do we want to be able to manage this in the future? But it does give us that lever to say, okay, let's hold off on it. It is 0% interest. We talked about that. If it wasn't 0%, we'd absolutely look at it a little bit differently because it is saving the taxpayers money this way. But how do we use this lever in the future? And so, again, there's very few levers, and we're just utilizing this as one to be able to have a mill levy strategy out there to try to maintain that instead of having a lot of flexibility. That's my perception and the reason that we made the decision to go this way, or making the recommendation to go this way.
Ms. Ashley, we wrestled with this very heavily, and Dr. Beller testified to the fact that I asked him many questions, and I wrestled with this for many, many nights. In fact, I made my own spreadsheet. I duplicated what Dustin did and played with many, many, many different scenarios. And, I guess it came down to the fact that, as Mr. Shire basically said, it is a strategy, and that really all this is a strategy. We are a growing school district. We are committing, with every bond issue we do, we're committing people 23 years out to make payments. So it is a strategy that we're looking at 23 years out now. It is, how will we be reminded of this? Every time we look at another bond issue, this is going to be on the screen. This $3.5 million starting in 2031. It's going to be on the screen every time we evaluate a new bond issue. So it's going to be a constant reminder to us. One of the things that I wrestled with early on also is the fact that it was pointed out to me that as a school district, this is not going toward operating costs. This is going toward asset allocation. And we as a school board are building assets that not only are we using now, but the people in 2031 are going to be using also. So we're building an asset base now that the people then are going to be also using. So that was a decision I wrestled with. It took me a long time to understand that. But when you take look at a long-term issue of, as a school district, we're providing not only for our students now, but for the base for those people that are going to be attending the school now. Yes, it was difficult for me, like I said, I wrestled with this for a long, long time, talked to a number of people about it. We are committing now to a strategy that says, okay, we're taking advantage of this interest-free money to maximize what we can do now with the money, with the understanding, yes, future people will pay it back, but today we're paying back decisions that were made 20 years ago also. So, like I said, believe me, your questions are very pertinent and ones I wrestled with also, but I think, first I thought it was a very irresponsible measure to do it this way, but as I took a look at it and just remembered the difference between us as a school district, between you and me personally wouldn't do it this way. But as a school district building an asset base for those people that are coming behind us, I feel much more comfortable with. So my comments there.
Let me pose this question to you. If we don't start escrowing this principal for 17 years, there's a likelihood that this building is going to need some deferred maintenance in 17 years, which is going to cost money on top of the principal that has to be repaid. And at that point in time, we'll still owe a good part of the principal. I think that needs to be taken into consideration. And with other bond issues where we did have interest expense, we started making those in regular payments, and the principal was part of that payment. The only difference here is that we don't have to pay the interest portion.
Right.
We just have to pay the principal portion of it.
Right. And I guess the only difference is that we're saying that we can maximize our dollars today by the fact that we're not having to pay interest on it, okay? And once again, we've taken a look at, this isn't, we're isolating on the $3.5 million, but we're looking at if, as Mr. Shire alluded to a little bit, if this was probably $100 million, yes, not to say that this isn't a significant amount, but in our overall budget, it is, a small amount. And at the time, if the projections are right, which the evaluation of Olathe, I think the district probably will continue pretty much close to, what we assume 2% a year growth, that it's never an insignificant amount of tax dollars, believe me. But I think, like I said, it's not that we're ignoring it. We've just come up with a strategy that says, okay, we are going to take responsibility for maximizing our dollars now, and understanding that we are, putting it on the shoulders of those people 20 years from now that we have also built into it from that time, at that time. So we're not ignoring it. We're just, I can never totally justify doing it, other than saying it's a strategy. Any bond interest we do is a strategy. When we refinanced the things, it was refinance some of our bonds. It was a strategy at that time. So it, like I said, as long as we're taking responsibility for it and maximizing the dollars now, like I said, we can argue all night. No, I can't ever totally justify it, other than the fact that I think we are being responsible with what we're doing, because we do have a plan. So.
I think, as the other member of that committee, that the thing that I'm continually reminded of as being a board member, and you would know this as well as some of the others who've been on the board quite a while, is that we've all made decisions about bonds that we're paying for now. We're paying for bonds that we were not a part of, and we are going to continue to do that because we're a growing school district. And in my mind, we have flexibility at this point to choose to defer those payments, or as our economy improves and we feel like we can manage taking on those payments earlier, we still have the flexibility to do that. And that's how I'm basing my decision, is it allows us the flexibility to either wait until we have to, or to choose a time where it allows us to manage our money the most effectively. And so that's why I'm choosing to make the decision that I did.
Comment last month when I came to the board, and my first reaction, Ms. Ashley, was the same as yours, because as individuals we all know the advantage of paying down debt. We all try to accelerate our mortgage payments, because we know if we can take 4, 5, 6, 7 years off our mortgage, we save a lot of money in interest. Individually and as business people and as individuals, that's how we live our lives, and we don't like debt, and we try to pay debt down as quickly as we can to our advantage. And so my first initial reaction to this is, that we should amortize this over like we'd ordinarily amortize any bond issue. And your comment about our current bond indebtedness was amortized because the investors want their interest payment. For one reason that we have to amortize that. But the longer I looked at this, the more I considered that, well, we're not paying any interest on this. And then every July, I always ask John, what's the mill levy going to be? I want to know what the mill levy is going to be, because we have to send those tax statements out. And any time that we can give ourselves some flexibility, some room to work on our mill levy, and if we know that the goal of the board is that we keep our bond and interest under 20 mills. That's an established goal policy of the board, and we've done that for as long as I've been on the board, been able to do that. And we don't know what funding is going to look like from the state level. And sometimes, I think last year we were able to do that. We were able to move some mill levy over to our capital outlay because our mill levy and our bond and interest was going down, and we were able to do that without increasing taxes for our mill levy and the taxes for our citizens in our community. So the longer I looked at this, the more I came to the conclusion that this gave us some flexibility. It will give us some flexibility come July. It will give us some flexibility come July of 2014, 15, 16. And if we get to the point where we say, okay, we can put $500,000 towards that without suffering over on the capital outlay side, and still maintain a stable mill levy for our taxpayers, we could do that. So we give ourselves that lever and that flexibility to be able to do that. Philosophically, I don't agree with it, from a personal standpoint, like Mr. Poland said, you know, we don't like debt and we like to pay down debt. But in this case, it gives us there's another side of this that we can look at and says it gives us some flexibility going forward. And I would hope that sometime in the future that the board would say we can put $500,000 towards that. Have that flexibility to be able to do that without being locked in to have to do it.
The escrow that comes from the other Q-scabs that we already have in place, does that money accumulate in our bond and interest account?
It does not actually. It goes into the escrow is held in trust, correct?
Security Bank of Kansas City.
Security Bank of Kansas City would have the escrow account.
Does that show on our reserves in any way?
No.
Well, I appreciate all of your comments. I have not changed my mind. I cannot support the way that this is being proposed, but thank you for your comments.
Well, then if everyone else is ready, we'll go ahead. I'll accept a motion just for the second portion, the Q-scab bonds.
Okay, so let me make sure I read this correctly.
Okay.
To approve the resolution authorizing the public sale of the 2013B qualified school construction bonds, series of general obligation bonds, a unified school district number 233, Johnson County, Kansas, and certain other actions related to such bonds. Is that correct?
All right, a second?
Not to make a thing of details also, but do we need to put in there the bond date, March 7th? That's part of the part of it here.
On March 7th,
Okay, like I said,
2013.
I don't know if that's important or not.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Then we need a second.
Second.
Ms. Hibbs is writing quickly.
Okay. Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mrs. Felter?
No.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes. Excuse me.
Mr. Shear?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
No.
The motion carries. Thank you for that conversation. 6.02, approval of structural steel bids for elementary number 35. Any questions or comments? Then I would accept them. Oh,
I would move to approve the structural steel bids for elementary 35 from Shawnee Steel and Welding in the amount of $934,500.
Second.
Ms. Hibbs, we have a motion by Mr. Parker and a second by Ms. Felter. Would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Felter?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Mr. Shear?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
The motion carries. 6.03, approval of trade bids for elementary number 35. Questions or comments? Then a motion?
Accept the bids listed in the bid summary as presented for approval of trade bids for elementary 35.
A second?
Ms. Hibbs, we have a motion by Mr. Poland and a second by Mr. Shear. Would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Mr. Shear?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mrs. Felter?
Yes.
The motion carries. 7.01, approval of Head Start Not-for-Profit Corporation dissolution. Questions or comments?
Dr. Berry, can you just take a couple of minutes again, because I don't know if the public really understands the purpose or the direction or how this can benefit us going forward?
It's purely to dissolve something that happened in 2001, because at that time, that was the only vehicle they had to try and apply for some grants and some additional monies. They had to establish themselves, the Head Start program, as a 501c3. And so at this point, it's no longer necessary to do that because they're under the auspices of the Olathe Public School District. And so it is one of those technicality things, and our attorney has reviewed it, and it says we just need to dissolve that so that it's no longer out there and functioning.
But by doing this, it's not going to change what we're offering. The students are going to be able to be...
It's our business as usual. It's just getting rid of something that was created a long time ago that's no longer used.
Very good.
Then I would accept a motion.
I move to approve the not-for-profit corporation dissolution of the written consent as presented.
Second.
Ms. Hibbs, we have a motion by Mr. Scheer and a second by Mr. Poland. Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Mr. Scheer?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mrs. Felter?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes. The motion carries. We need to set end-of-year special meeting date and change our 2013-14 July organizational meeting date. Are there any comments or questions? All right.
My quick comment is that obviously set by business and finance so that we can close the year out appropriately. So that's why it's in that last week. Gives staff a couple days then to actually finish it out. And likewise, the date in July is always set backing up from the time where you have to approve a budget as a board in August in time to get it to the county to be certified. So it all is based on dates. And this is it also helps us to be that time in July instead of a regular board meeting time because, again, once we close out in June, we like to have audited figures to help start the new budget process. So, again, that's why those dates are a little funny.
Everyone has their calendars out. Is everyone good with that date? Okay, then I would accept a motion.
Move to approve Wednesday, June 26, 2013, 6 p.m. as a date and time for the 2012-2013 end-of-year special meeting, and to change 2013-2014 July organizational meeting from Tuesday, July 16th to Thursday, July 18th.
I'll second.
Ms. Hibbs, we have a motion by Mr. Poland and a second by Ms. Felter. Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Mr. Scheer?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mrs. Felter?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Motion carries. 7.03, approval of budget development goals and calendar for the fiscal year 2013-2014. Comments or questions? Then I would accept a motion.
I move to approve the budget development goals and calendar for fiscal year 2013-2014 as presented.
Second.
Ms. Hibbs, I have a motion by Mr. Scheer and a second by Mr. Parker. Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Scheer?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mrs. Felter?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
7.04, approval of the 2014-15 district master calendar. Comments? Questions? Then a motion, please.
I move to approve the 2014 to 2015 district master calendar as presented.
Second.
Ms. Hibbs, I have a motion by Ms. Felter and a barely audible second by Dr. Daniels. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mrs. Felter?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Mr. Scheer?
Yes.
Signed.
Dr. Daniels, I'm assuming the voice is gone because of the outstanding game last night. Does that have something to do with this? I'm just kind of curious.
No, it doesn't. But thank you for rubbing it in.
Under future action items, it looks like we have 13 different items. I understand we're going to pull 8.09, our proposed boundary adjustment for Washington and Mahaffey, for a special presentation. Do we have any comments or questions on the other items?
Go ahead.
If Mr. Hutchison or Dr. Berry could, just for purposes of the viewing audience, speak to the student fees and any changes that are anticipated.
The anticipated changes in the student fees for next year really revolve around meal prices, or what we're proposing. We are unable to set those at this time because we need some established guidelines by the state. We anticipate being able to have those approved March, no later than April, but all other fees we're recommending holding constant at this year's levels.
And when, just from my memory, did we hold fees constant last year, or did we raise fees? Are we basically trying to hold 2 to 3 years if possible?
We had been increasing the instructional materials fees by about $5 a year. We've done that the last couple of years, made some adjustments to yearbook fees and the like. So this year we were just going to hold them constant and not make any increases.
Mr. Poland?
On the student trips, I don't remember which one it was, but I remember either some of the questions that was asked or one of the justifications was the fact that in the written description of the curriculum, it was stated in there that was an expectation that any trips would be paid for. I would like to have that reviewed, and if possible, think about removing any such expectations that of a monetary. We create the opportunity that we're not necessarily, as money is becoming more difficult, I think if that is in a written description, it needs to be removed. That'd be my suggestion.
I don't understand your comment, Mr. Poland.
One of the questions that was asked by one of the board members, and one of the justifications for doing it was that it was part of the curriculum description that that if they qualified for and I'll find if they qualified for something at the end of the year, some sort of competition, that basically it was our responsibility to pay for them to go. And I can find out which one that was, but I remember that was a comment in one of them.
I think the reference in this case would have been to the robotics program, aerospace engineering, Olathe Northwest, and that piece is such right now an integral part of their curriculum in terms of the focus, and this is the application piece that says we actually make this robot and we go and put it into competition to have that experience to see how it goes. So they put that into the regular budget. It's not fundraising, but we can certainly review that and talk some more about it. But if
that's included anywhere else, and I think it just needs to be reviewed because as student trips are becoming more and more expensive, and we're having less and less opportunity to spend money. I think we just need to take a look at it.
Okay.
Okay. The Washington and Mahaffey boundary change. Ms. Dugan, it looks like, is making this presentation. Dr. Dugan, I'm sorry.
Tonight I bring to you as a proposed future action item recommendations for some boundary adjustments for Washington and Mahaffey Elementary. Whoops. There we go. Shared with our community and approved by the Board of Education back in 2005 was kind of an outline of the process we follow when we do boundary adjustments. I'm not going to review that, but of note, in 2005, and as many of you that have sat on this Board of Education know, boundary adjustments are highly emotionally charged issues. And the board very wisely in 2005 approved some guiding principles. These are the things we're going to follow as we go through these emotionally charged issues. We're going to make sure we recognize all students' academic, safety, social, emotional needs. Our enrollment numbers should enhance and support learning environments. We know they play a role. The size in enrollment plays a role. We're looking for long-term boundary solutions. And we recognize, and you guys know, that the Board of Education has to be fiscally responsible in its decisions. Boundary Task Force or Boundary Study Group meets every year, a number of times a year, and its sole responsibility is to analyze that demographic, statistical enrollment information. Our job is to watch for schools and enrollment issues. And established last year and then looked at in more depth this year was some enrollment concerns for Washington Elementary. Let me give you a little background. In 2012, so this year's enrollment count as September 20 was 490 students. In 2009, when we were still K-6, when we still had both kindergarten through 6th grade, the enrollment was at 441. So we've removed an entire grade level, and yet the enrollment in Washington continues. In terms of functional capacity, what we anticipate the number of kids we can get in the school, Washington's at about 94% of its functional capacity. In terms of how it utilizes rooms, how it's using nooks and crannies and instructional spaces to find rooms for small groups of kids and services, you can see it is at 111% of its room utilization. And our estimate, so our enrollment estimate going forward, it will continue to grow at a steady pace, not huge growth, but next year we're looking at 497 students. In the 5-year out, again, is slow but steady growth. Here are the goals the Boundary Study Group set up for looking at proposing boundary adjustments that would provide some enrollment relief for Washington. We wanted to provide adequate space at Washington that serves a population that requires some unique services, ELL, reading specialists, math specialists, and they need some good instructional learning space. The class sizes at Washington, one of the goals was to, in some capacity, start to lower some of those class sizes. We weren't interested in impacting the at-risk population at Washington Elementary. That was not one of the goals of this boundary adjustment. We wanted to impact as few schools as possible. We wanted to impact maybe just one other school and not impact multiple schools. And we wanted to make sure we did this in a way that we were not creating future enrollment issues. We weren't going to make a move for Washington, then they'd need more later, or the schools that we were impacting. Quick scatter plot Skittles map of the area. So the area in purple is Washington's current boundaries, and the little dots are all the students. Washington has some pretty unique pockets of students. I'm trying to see if I can, there you go. I'm circling Washington Elementary there. So its pockets of students are right around the school here, and then the pocket of students down here. Sorry. Here's another look, and I want to look at some of the surrounding schools. So this is the process the Boundary Study Group went through. Here's Washington, and I'm going to ultimately end up talking about Mahaffey Elementary, which we gave away in our title of the school that we're looking at doing some boundary adjustments with. But I want to look at the surrounding schools to Washington. Countryside, Indian Creek, Ridgeview, Central, Northview, and Mahaffey. And we looked at some and have been tracking their enrollment as well. And we looked at, again, 2012 enrollment, where they were in terms of their functional capacity, where they were in terms of their room utilization. And then we did the same thing. We looked at their 5 years out. Where are they going to be as we make good decisions about adjustments? We don't want to do something in a couple years, have not made a good decision. And I'll let you glance through. I'm not going to go through that. These schools are well utilized. Some not so much in terms of their functional capacity, but the population and the types of students they're serving and the unique services provided at those schools, many of which are Title I schools, have their room utilizations high. And then you'll see the exception to that's the last one, which is Mahaffey. Mahaffey's at 71% of its functional capacity and 83% of its room utilization. And of note is that our 5-year estimate for Mahaffey is that it will continue to decline in its enrollment. So we focused on Mahaffey, and that's where we started in terms of options. We felt it was our best option of a nearby school that had room for students, and we could propose reducing the enrollment at Washington. Here's some history on Mahaffey. It has currently 371 students. It is at its lowest enrollment at the school since it opened 22 years ago. Interesting, when Mahaffey opened 22 years ago, it was to relieve Washington. And so we're kind of coming back. In 2006, the school held 505 students. There is limited undeveloped lots and vacant ground for new residential development, meaning that as we look, Mahaffey isn't going to suddenly boom. There isn't place. Mahaffey, if you know it all in terms of its boundaries, folks enjoy it there and they tend to stay there. And so there hasn't been lots of turnover, and nor is there place for much development, which again is part of our 5-year forecast that it's going to continue to have an enrollment decline as there aren't these new kindergartners coming into Mahaffey. Looking again at the map, now I've included the gray area here, skip down here. That's Mahaffey's boundaries and Washington. What we've proposed, and I'll walk you through the process of how we talk to both the schools about this proposal. In the bolder gray outline, this area that is currently Washington students, we are proposing we pick this area and have them start to attend Mahaffey. The area is equidistant to both schools, about a mile. It's a mile to Mahaffey, probably from the farthest, and a mile to Washington. Let me give you some more information. Here's the impact on Washington, and it's varied. And again, it's predicting kids in the right grades, and you move a neighborhood and you hope they're going to pull from all the right grades. We're looking at about 84 to 86 students that live in that new boundary area that we now propose moving to Washington. The impact would be a loss of 86 students approximately for looking at next year's estimate. Keeping in mind some of that estimate has some of these fifth graders moving on to middle school for Washington, and Washington has less kindergartners coming in next year, but it looks like a reduction from 490 to 404 for Washington next year. If you look at the final line there for free and reduced, we in fact did not impact. They are at 82% of their students receive a free or reduced lunch. That impact didn't change. It's about at 85% is our prediction for next year, so we didn't impact that. And we see some nice reduction in class sizes at those early grade levels. Current kindergarten class size of 23 next year would be 19. Current grade 1 at 19 would be 17. Grade 2, 20 to 21. Not huge impacts, but the relief of the number of students we believe will have a significant impact on that room utilization, that they'll be able to have better spaces for some of their services there at Washington. Impact on Mahaffey. Currently 371 students. They would be looking at an enrollment projection of 437 for next year. A difference of about 66 students, so where'd 20 of them go? 15 of them are students that receive ELL services at Washington. They now receive they would now, in this boundary adjustment, if it were to be approved, would receive their ELL services at Fairview, which has the room and the staffing and the capacity to do so. And then again, some students are not age eligible for Mahaffey. They've either gone on now to the Santa Fe Trail Middle School. So a difference of about 66 additional students at Mahaffey. It does impact Mahaffey's free and reduced student population from 30 to 38%. Not a huge increase, but it does increase. We visited with the community a lot about how we make these transitions in terms of the work the principals do and open houses, and we'll start immediately after an action is taken in March, should it be approved, to start to welcome those families and get information and invite them up to the building. And our principals do an amazing job of those transition activities. I want to walk you through a little bit of the process and the input we gained. Actually, I think Mr. Scheer sat in on one of these. The Boundary Task Force has been reviewing this for over a year and looking at enrollment. On January 15th, we went out to the site council / PTOs, both at Washington Elementary and Mahaffey Elementary. Set up a website right after those with all the presentations and the comments we've received in a Q&A section. January 28th, we had a Washington community meeting where information went out to all the students and families at Washington to come join us for an informational meeting and an input gathering. Did the same thing the next night at Mahaffey. And then here we are tonight giving you an informational report for future action, and then we'd hope for this to be an action item at the March 7th. We had lots of input. And we had a chance to put that up on the website and tried to be incredibly transparent. Great questions, nice turnout at our community meetings. And lots of good questions. And if you've done boundary adjustments before, some of these are familiar questions. I have to honestly tell you that there was never a question of need, neither from Washington or Mahaffey. Washington needed enrollment relief. That was felt. No one questioned that. This may surprise you. We didn't have a lot of angst over the location in the boundaried area. It made sense. It was close. It allowed eased transportation. We weren't crossing large roads. Some of the issues that have been in the past, this seemed to make sense to folks. And honestly, I can't tell I had one person question need or honestly question that particular area. I did have a couple community folks ask why we didn't look at a whole different area on the map, and that's when we pulled up our dot map, and there were absolutely no kids in that area. So while a good idea, it probably wasn't going to offer the relief Washington was looking for. They did ask some really great questions, and we have taken that input because we've made some other decisions that would, should this be approved, make this a better transition. Washington offers full-day kindergarten, okay, at a free rate, different because it's a Title I school. Mahaffey's not a Title I school. We reminded the community that any student that qualified for free or reduced lunch got that same tuition break or payment break for kindergarten. So that relieved a lot of anxiety. Students that attend Washington get a reduced rate for their Y Club or Y Care after school activities. So we've worked with Y Care, and they're offering to grandfather in that rate for any of those students making the transition to Mahaffey, and offer scholarships like they do for many students. So they've been great partners. The other piece was that some students receive a hot breakfast at Washington. And that wouldn't typically be offered at Mahaffey. And we're in conversations with Scott Kingery, and he can make that happen if there's a need and we need to offer something unique for some students making this transition. So we feel with the questions that came, we got great input. We were able to kind of answer some more questions in terms of how to make this transition be a benefit for Washington and also a great benefit for these families that are going to start now at Mahaffey. If you haven't had a chance, and get on our website and click on boundary changes, all this information's been up there and for the community to review. So I'll conclude the recommendation from the Boundary Study Group with input from both the Washington and Mahaffey communities would be to move the students that reside in map grid 510, which is in the bolded gray area, currently attending Washington Elementary, to have them attend Mahaffey Elementary beginning the 2013-2014 school year.
Dr. Dugan, you mentioned that some students would be attending Fairview for ELL services or for the whole day.
Our ELL is Services at Elementary is a center-based program, and so that they would actually now be attending Fairview for the whole day. It looks like about 15 students in that 510 map area.
And we've evaluated Fairview?
Yes, yes. We have visited with Dr. Jan Heinen in terms of staffing and availability of space, and it works out very well.
Thank you.
None of the students in the subject area are available for busing to Washington, and they would not be available for busing to Mahaffey?
I'm going to double check this for you, Mr. Poland. I'll let you know. But if I'm correct, there was bus service if they wanted it, and they could also have that bus service to Mahaffey. So there would be no change. It was available if they wanted it to Washington. It could still be available to Mahaffey.
And no changes in the middle school or high school the kids will attend?
No, and that was important to families, that they'd be able to continue on as they have to Santa Fe Trail Middle School.
And just to be sure I understand on the reduced rates as people transition to for programs that aren't available at Mahaffey, is that just for the kids that are transitioning over there in 4 years? That will not continue? But the kids, it'll be available to kids from this area?
Right, and that's our plan right now. If in fact it turns out there's a need for this type of consideration in YMCA or a hot breakfast, that's going to be an ongoing consideration. These families are telling us some of them have this need, they had it there, so at least get it up and running for next year. But I think similar to any of our programs, if we have a group of kids for whom that's a need, we're going to kind of facilitate that for them.
Thank you.
Thanks, great questions.
This obviously increases the free and reduced percentage at Mahaffey. What's the threshold to Title I?
50%. So Mahaffey will be at 38%, and it's 50% or higher is our current elementary Title I status.
As we project the growth in the future years, will it ever take it up that additional 12% to where it would become a Title I? Was that ever brought up in discussion?
It was. It was not brought up in terms of, there were certainly some conversations about what's that mean to go from 30 to 38, and will that look different in our classrooms? And we had teachers from both schools having that discussion, and it was a very positive conversation. It is not anticipated. Again, we didn't pull a huge pocket over, and out of that, there is not a large population of free and reduced, and so it doesn't appear that it would grow. It will probably stay steady at 38%, at least our 5-year projection on it.
I just wanted to make a quick comment because I did get a chance to be present at the site council at the Washington. And Dr. Bray, I want to let you know that Dr. Dugan and Mr. Yeager did an absolute great job. And as you mentioned, this was, and being new to the board, this was my first opportunity to be involved in any type of boundary changes. And so I want to commend you guys for what a great job you did, because there were some emotions there, and there are some challenging times to do that, but you both did an absolute great job talking to them. As you said, it was very enlightening that nobody questioned the fact that Washington needed the relief. And then as you talked through the facts and factual information and everything else, both you and Mr. Yeager did a great job of talking everybody through that. So I want to thank you guys because you did a very professional job of that. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Never easy. Everyone loves their school, loves their school. That's exactly how we want it. And no one wanted to leave Washington. That was very clear that night as well. I will say, so I say it out loud, if there are 4th graders at Washington that would like to complete their 5th grade year next year and complete that career, they absolutely will submit a transfer and have that approved. And that was an emotional question asked that evening, so I want to make sure I say that out loud.
Right.
And the board members aren't always present at these meetings, and the public should know that all of the comments are taken down and shared with board members. And I appreciate you taking the time to do that, because it helps us to get a feel for how the conversation's going.
Great. Yeah. 2 great communities.
Real quick, as we're giving accolades, I'd like to say I appreciate the way this process has gone. In the past, sometimes these things have felt like we rushed in. We've had to rush through them and make decisions real quick, boom, boom, boom. I like the fact that, we've spent a year doing it, and now we've made it all public. We've discussed it here, and we're still giving it another month to make the decision. So I really appreciate that.
Are we ready to move along? Section 9, written information. The board received 3 separate reports on the selection process for our new student information system, some construction change orders, and our regular Head Start monthly director's report. Are there any comments or questions?
I just had one question in 9.01. Really appreciate all of the information that was sent out to the board in regards to that selection process. And I'm sure that you've thought about every question that could possibly ask, or every scenario, or every upside down. I know I commented last month that it's got to work. I had one quick question. I'm sure that we have, but could you assure us that you looked at an interface with Kansas Department of Education? In other words, all of the reports and all of the information that we have to provide to the Kansas Department of Education will be able to come out of this system in a functional manner, and a manner that the Kansas Department of Education would accept and be agreeable to.
And we've hammered that one to death, I'll tell you for sure, because that's very important to us, and we want to make that as smooth as possible, because it's dependent on my staff to do that. So yes, we have looked at that hard. They are certified. The vendor that we are entering into negotiations with is already certified with the state of Kansas, so we're assured that that's going to go smoothly. We also feel very comfortable that we have the expertise on my staff that can help drive any future changes that need to be made there. So we're comfortable with that process.
Thank you.
Any more questions? I have a feeling that Mr. Parker's not going to get a lot of sleep the year that we're rolling this out. Our next portion of our agenda is topics for discussion. I have 2, and if the board would allow, I'd like to go first, and then we'll open it up for other discussion. Okay. My husband and I like to tell our girls that when you make a mistake, you get in front of it. And tonight, I have been given an opportunity to do just that. And so I took the liberty of writing my comments down so that I could share them exactly as I wanted to. And so I'm going to read this to you. As my fellow board members know, last Tuesday I went to Topeka to testify on House Bill 2085. I made it known that I was president of the Board of Education, but that I was speaking only for myself. My comments focused on the success we've realized in our district and my desire to continue to have the local control necessary to build upon a system that is working. I tried to convey the pride of accomplishment that was shared at our board meeting last summer when Mr. Parker, Dr. Banikowski, and Mr. Kendall returned from the National Labor Management Conference in Cincinnati. I expressed that while I wasn't speaking on behalf of the board, I did believe my comments represented the sentiment of the board. That was an overreach of my authority and as board member and as a president. As Ms. Felter pointed out to me, it's essentially impossible to remove the board member hat when speaking in public, and I should have considered that. Additionally, since I did not share my testimony with my fellow board members, that put at least one of you in an awkward position of appearing out of the loop. So the reason I bring this up tonight is twofold. First, I want to apologize to each of you for overstepping my role as board member and as president, and for putting you in an awkward or untenable position. I take both roles very seriously, and in my desire to defend our schools, I did not fully consider the potential consequences of my actions. I assure you I will give more careful consideration to such situations in the future. Second, it's important to lay some groundwork for moving forward. We no longer have Dr. George to serve as our representative in Topeka, yet it is imperative we find an effective and timely way to communicate with the members of the legislature who represent our area. My focus is always to do what's best for students in our district, and I'm certain that is the same for each of you. We need to find the best way to move forward that allows us to participate in the legislative process and advocate for the needs of the district, but also maintain the integrity of the board and protect the goodwill of our members. With that, I'm sure that some of you have some comments.
Well, I'll go first. Thank you, Amy, very much. Amy's responding just to a question I had after being approached by representatives and one senator about her testimony, and I was in the dark completely and looked rather foolish. And I felt like it reflected poorly on me and poorly on the board. And so I appreciate it. I really think that was articulated very well, and I think it's healthy to have good and above the table conversation. We're reaching a whole new era of trying to communicate with the people that hold the purse strings for the funding issues. So maintaining good relationships has always been critical, but now we're forging ahead in new ways, and we've got to just define what those are. And being on the legislative committee, I just felt like I should have been kept in the loop. It wasn't necessarily even the content of her testimony or the fact that she had testimony. It was the fact that I had no idea what she was talking about. And it reflected poorly on her because I couldn't even defend or say, yes, it's the sentiment of the board, or no, it isn't, because I had no idea what she was speaking of. So I appreciate it very much, you saying that, and I have full faith that we will figure out how to move forward without Mr. George advocating for us, and thank you for articulating that.
I thought over the past week has been how, as we've cut our budgets and looked for not replacing positions, Dr. George performed a very valuable service for us in Topeka, and when requests for testimony, came up, and we needed to make decisions within a 24-hour period of time, we had someone available to go and do that. And so I think we have to think about how we balance that. We have a document that probably needs updating, but within the boardsmanship policy document, some of those issues I think are addressed. How does the board officer speak for the board? When does the board officer speak for the board? How does the board officer communicate that he or she is going to speak for the board, et cetera? And probably some of those items should be revisited because we have a new board composition. But I think it's important that we do that because, again, it's the timeliness of the testimony that's the issue. And so making a decision about who speaks and who does it when sometimes is a very quick decision. So those would be the comments that I would want to share.
I took a look at that boardsmanship document, and it does need a few adjustments because we've changed our meeting times, and I think we've altered a little bit the timeliness of when we do Dr. Berry's review. And so it was my hope that maybe a couple of board members would like to take on reviewing that document and proposing some changes and bringing it back to us for approval next month or the following, something like that. Also, in my conversation this morning with Mr. Poland and Ms. Felter, we talked about the fact that this document existed, but the new board members weren't really aware of it. And also the fact that we're about to have a new board member. And so maybe we need to look at some sort of a document that can be handed off to a new board member that talks a little bit about what is available to them as they're becoming acclimated to the role and getting to know the people on staff and getting to know the other board members, and including this boardsmanship document within those materials would be a good way to get a new board member off the ground and running.
Ms. Martin, I was on the board when this document was drafted, and I was a part of the drafting of that. And the whole idea at the time that we did the guide was that it would be a tool for new board members to use and to understand board protocol. Obviously, we didn't make that happen, so in the future, hopefully we can make sure that as new board members come on, they have an opportunity to review the document and also to sit down probably with the president of the board or board officers and answer any questions that are surrounding that. And I would be glad to volunteer to work with another board member or two and the superintendent in regards to, and our legal staff in regards to if there's anything that we need to change in the document or update. I'll be glad to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Parker.
I'd like to serve with Harlan, too.
All right. You guys can, is there anyone else? We could have 3. No? Okay, then, so Mr. Parker and Mr. Poland will work on updates to this document and bring it back to us at a future date. I assume we have to approve it.
I'm not offering to be a part of redrafting this, but I would like to make a comment specifically under the topic of committees of the board. And I think on a global level, we've already addressed the fact that...
What page is that on?
This is on page 7. That on a global level, we've already addressed the fact that maybe we've kind of hidden this in the drawer, not intentionally, but we haven't brought it out and reviewed it with the entire board. But as you're looking at this document to review and going forward for the next few months that I'm still on the board, I would just like to remind our fellow board members of the way I interpret the purpose of the committees. And when I say committees, I'm talking about staff and board committees. Because the specific reason that we put those committees together was to delve into difficult topics, complicated topics, items maybe that required more research so that we could have 2 or 3 board members get educated on those things and then come back to the board as a whole and share their feelings, the feelings of the committee as a whole, so that we could get feedback from fellow board members. And I can think of some situations this year where we haven't done a good job of giving feedback to the entire board from those committees. And the QSCAB vote that we just went through is an excellent example of that. So I would just remind my fellow board members that in serving on these committees, finance, legislative, construction, that there's a lot of work involved in that. There's a lot of time that goes involved in that, and it's time well spent, but you need to share your thoughts with the rest of the board as far as what's discussed in those committees so that we know where you're coming from and what you've learned in that committee. It's supposed to be a time-saving device, too, for the rest of the board. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage you to continue those committees. I think they have great value for a lot of reasons, not just for learning what's going on, but getting acquainted with staff, working with staff, and having a better understanding of whatever the topics are.
I think that's well stated. I think so far what I've seen from some of the committees is that we do deal very, very deeply with it, but the communication back to the rest of the board members is what's lacking. And yes. I fully sympathize with what you just said, and I appreciate it. I think it needs to be addressed. Or
And I
it
think some
bears
of
the
those-
responsibility on us board members to make sure we communicate well.
I think some of those communications could be in a written form as well.
Part of the agenda.
Pardon me?
Maybe even part of the agenda and
Yes.
the written reports. It would
But
be
there are others
appropriate.
that definitely need to be a part of our conversation when we're discussing particular topics or we have presentations.
We'll make sure, that's a good point. So we need to write with evidence.
Cite your source.
What's your evidence? So, technical writing. So, we'll make that a bullet point under that and make sure that we, as committee members, provide the evidence for our recommendations.
Okay. And our salaries will be adjusted accordingly, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Just real quick, Amy, if I could just address your comments and, to the public, probably limited knowledge what we're referring to, but Amy stated her situation very well. Anytime you have a situation like this, you hear conflicting reports, and in retrospect, basically, Amy, went to confession tonight, and she admitted she made a decision that in retrospect, I won't say regretted, but she wished she had made a different decision, and I appreciate that. We had a very good, healthy conversation this morning, Ms. Felter and Ms. Martin and myself. And I don't want to equate this to, I don't want to imply that I'm acting as a parent, but I do want to draw upon some of my parental experience. And, with our kids, and I think Amy alluded to that too, is when you make a choice, you bear the responsibility, you live with the responsibility, you learn from it. And I guess what I'm asking fellow board members is that Amy's come forward and said, yes, here's what happened, here it is. All of us need to learn from it. We are going to have 1, 2, maybe 3 new members. Should just probably be 1, but who knows? And I guess what I always tell my kids is, in some games there's a 3-strike rule. When decisions like this are made, in my household, there's a 2-strike rule. You've been warned about it once, don't do it again. I think all of us now hopefully will learn something from the experience here and Amy's ability to share with us. But I guess what I'm saying is I think we all need to learn from it. And as far as I go moving forward, I've got 1 strike against me. And I hopefully would not make a decision like this again. That I would, when I say I've got 1 strike against me, that from what I know about it is that if the roles were reversed, I've already got 1 strike against me, and so I have no excuses. So I hope that we've all learned from this and realize the responsibility we have as board members. Whether it's the president's position, whether it's any other position here, we do have responsibility to the community, but also to our fellow board members. So I do want to express my appreciation for the fact that Amy sharing her confession with the public, and I think that was an important decision that she made, so I appreciate it.
Mr. Poling bring up a good point, and when we look at the Board of Education Code of Conduct on page 3, it's very clear that when we speak as individuals, we speak as individuals, and we don't speak on behalf of the board. And I think we're all very clear on that. And this, coming back to this testimony, when I was at KSB, KSB is always pleading for school board members to go to the legislature and to testify. And when you read all of the information that comes from KSB, they tell us when the hearings are and to go up here. So I think going forward, we need to clarify in our code of conduct, what is the position of the board in regards to individual board members being able to go and testify as an individual in regards to some legislation. I don't think we can say that as a board member, I can't go to Topeka and testify on an issue.
Yeah, that's not what we're saying either. Let me just clarify, because I think we're being vague. I have the testimony here, and my chief complaint was there were 2. Amy Martin, president of the Board of Education, line 1 of the testimony. Mm-hmm. It's your title, but if you're speaking for yourself, it should be Amy Martin, citizen of Olathe, as far as I'm concerned. And the very last sentence says, although, I don't even want to paraphrase, give me 1 second. It says, one note, these proceedings came up quickly and did not give our board an opportunity to adopt an official position on this bill. These comments are my own, and here's my complaint, but they reflect the sentiment of the board. I'm not complaining even about the content. It's just the process needs to be clarified, is my complaint. And we've dialogued it out. We've got a healthy resolution to this, and then we have next steps of clarifying our roles, our processes, and I have every faith that this is going to end up fine and we'll proceed forward. So just so you know, I think we should be involved in Topeka. It's what hat do we put on, and the process, if our board hat is on, what that looks like, the process.
Well, good point. And we'll make that as a bullet point in our code of conduct, so it's very clear that we testify, but we testify as individuals and not as board members. And you're right; it's hard to take that hat off. But I can take it off and say I'm speaking as Harlan Parker, individual citizen.
Oh yeah, and you could speak as Harlan Parker as a board member, but not with the sentiment of the board, without a process in place to accommodate that legally.
Right.
And I would encourage you as board members, you may disagree with me, but I would encourage you to identify yourselves as board members if you are testifying, because in my mind, that means that you've walked the walk.
It adds validity.
You've sat in the chair and you've got that firsthand experience, and I would hope that that means something in the testimony. Not that other testimonies don't mean anything, but I think that it's a different experience if you're a board member.
That's right. That's why there's so much gray area. Amy's comments were, well, it added meat to my argument or validity. Those weren't your words.
I felt it gave context.
That's right, and it did. And so all those ideas in there create a very gray area. And so we have all identified a way to crystallize the process, and I know we will. So thank you very much. And I really do appreciate you making comments, Amy. Thank you.
Well, just so I put my 2 cents in. Being fairly new on this, I appreciate having this open conversation, because this is important. Because again, whether you say Rick Shear on the school board, when I walk out in the public, a lot of times it's Rick Shear and they know you're on the school board. It is very, very hard to separate that out. So whether it's on paper or it's just the sentiment of what it is very difficult. So I think putting a little bit more guidelines out there, but I also agree with Miss Ashley here is that, you know what, there is a little bit of credibility there, okay? And you guys all know this, that every time you sit down and talk to a legislator, if you put in there that you're a school board member, they're going to listen to you a little bit more than you are a citizen. Whether it's right or wrong, they just absolutely do that. I agree, and I read the testimony which you had. Personally, I agree 100% with what Ms. Martin said, because we do have a great system here. And I know the point of what she was trying to do was to suggest that to the legislator and say, look, why are we trying to break a system when in fact it is working here? And we had some great conversations here, and we had some awards coming from, was it New York, showing that we do have that great process. So I agreed just setting the guidelines in place, but it is going to be hard, from my viewpoint, it's going to be very hard to take that school board hat off when you go out there and speak. So I just want to make sure, Mr. Parker, as you're talking about that, as we're putting this in place, let's make sure that we're allowed that credibility. That's the whole point of why we're here. That's why we were elected here, so that we could speak on behalf of all the taxpayers and the parents and things such as that. And if that means using the school board from that standpoint, obviously we want to make sure it's something that we all agree upon. But if we're going to utilize that as our position, then I want to be able to utilize that as my position so that we can get our point across better to the people that are going to make these decisions.
I wholeheartedly agree.
One of the things that I hope you'll consider when you go through clarifying this is that when you make testimony, they do ask you questions. And so if you identify yourself by name, I think it's highly likely that someone might ask what your interest is or how you base your opinion. So I think that whoever would choose to testify needs to be prepared to answer those questions in a way that we all find acceptable. Okay, are we ready to move on? Thank you very much. Okay, on a much brighter note, when you walked in, you might have noticed some flyers at the back of the room. This is not a surprise to Dr. Berry. He knows about it, but I don't think he knew that we planned to bring it up today. But you may have realized that Dr. Berry has been named an icon of education by Ingram's magazine. And I wanted to take a moment tonight to to take notice of that. We know he's covering his mouth. He hates this, and so we'll make it brief. But just in the first paragraph in the Ingram's introduction, it explains that these icons are people who make selfless contributions to education. And I think in the entire article, Dr. Berry spent the whole time giving the credit to his staff, which is wholly appropriate. But I wanted just to take a moment tonight to recognize what we already know, and that is that we have an excellent person at the helm here in Olathe, and just to express my gratitude as a board member, and I'm sure the others feel the same way. Dr. Daniels would like to note that she did not stand up.
Thank you. Rock chalk. There we go.
Okay, that's what I have. If there's anything anyone else would like to bring up tonight.
A couple of items. We are just around the corner from the 50-year anniversary of the district. Is that on your radar, Maggie? Is that on your radar? So I just wanted to make sure we all were aware, because just like I'm fully aware that my daughter's graduating, and it seems like she was that squalling baby with colic just yesterday, that 50-year mark will come up in a blink of an eye. So I would love to call for a committee to start involving the city, every city that we serve, the county, our state.
64. What year is it?
What'd you say?
It's
What year?
15.
2015. Yes. We were consolidated in 1965. And I think we should make it a whole year-long celebration, something we do special throughout the year, because we are Olathe, and it's the Olathe way. And I would be happy.
I believe
I'm very
Ms. Felter
good at
just
coordinating parties if you guys want me to.
Does the work.
Yeah, if Gabe does the video, right? So anyway, just a heads up on that, because I really think we can make this really big, and I don't know, create some award of some sort that we could win. And then school safety is another topic I've just had. When my kids went to Briarwood Elementary and I'd go and vote, I kept thinking, I can't believe we bring people in to vote here. It's sure not safe. And sure enough, I don't think it's very safe to invite everybody out to vote at our school. So I pulled a list, and we currently have 12 of our schools still hosting voting in the schools. And we have plenty of churches or plenty of other sites that I would like to try to move from the schools to other safe locations. Now, I know the spring, it's right around the corner, but we have 10 of our elementary schools, so we have 34 elementary schools, 10 of those still host, and then 2 of our middle schools. And I have a complete list right here. And I'm happy to help with that too, if need be. But I mean, throughout the whole county, there's a substantial amount of schools. So for Olathe, we actually have done, I don't know if we did it or if Johnson County Election Office did the move, but I think that's something that should be on our radar for sure.
Anything else? Okay, I believe we will have, superintendent comments. Oh, yeah. I was going to try to skip you.
Well, thank you tonight for the nice recognition. My kids told me that an icon is something you find on your phone, so that's they kind of bring you back.
Maybe
pretty
for our
quick.
50th anniversary, we could have a Dr. Berry icon.
No, that's not going to happen.
An app. There's an app for that.
Also, can't help but notice that Miss Ashley is starting to talk just a little bit like a short timer. But there are 5 months still that we'll look forward to having you be a part of this.
Very positive
You did. The other thing I want to note for tonight is that we are in transition on the microphones. Tonight's the first night we're using a new system, and I think someone in the crowd shared out that we need to maybe adjust just a little bit more. But one of the positives, as you'll know, the ones on the first and second row we got rid of, and just want to have staff members pop up to the podium, and that way we don't have anything that's draped across the aisle there. We were able to get rid of that piece, which is a little bit safer for those coming forward. So we'll continue to work with the new microphones and appreciate technology working on that. Comments quickly, if I can, please, in just 3 areas. We talk about the security of our schools, and we have now kicked off a multi-county task force of safety in our schools. It's called In Defense of Our Schools. Administrators and principals from our district will participate on this team. The steering committee kind of was 50-some people from the counties of Johnson and Miami, law enforcement, Secret Service, Sheriff's Department, a lot of people in the room that, again, are all ready to focus on how we can help our schools be more safe. They're complimentary that we do an awful lot of good for our schools, but there are things that we can do to improve that. And the way that I think it's going to help us is that these are the professionals in law enforcement that can help us. And we're going to do some case studies. We're going to look at tactics and strategies and see what makes sense. Not that they will dictate to schools in Johnson and Miami County, but they'll give us a toolbox that we can come back and locally then decide what's best. So I'm pretty excited about this. This group will commit to 4 meetings in the next 2 months. There'll be some media publicity about it to share what's going on, and then we'll have a report that will be brought back and we'll share with the Board of Education. So, again, excited that we're going to get some professional help. We are inundated right now with vendors contacting us about the latest, greatest safety piece that we need to have in our schools, and we need to be able to sort through some of that. We've already had some discussions in our district about things that we might change in terms of protocols, and Laverne has led that discussion for us a little bit already that says we used to lock down, which we still do, but it might be the concept that says in certain occasions the best strategy is to escape. And so we're going to talk about those things, again, based on input from law enforcement in our county. The second task force I want to mention is our bond task force that was mentioned earlier tonight. 58 members from our community, patrons, parents, staff members, business people, a wide variety of folks that are filling this room in the largest U-shaped table you could ever imagine in this room. And we had our second meeting this past Tuesday night. Again, the task force is being led by John Hutchison and Aaron Dugan, and from the community, a layperson, Shannon Wycliffe. Shannon is with one of the local banks and is a member on the foundation. They're looking at the 4 strands, and we got into the second one Tuesday night, but we're going to deal with the district's growth, safety and security, technology, and then aging facilities. And again, the plan is for this group to come back to you at some point with a recommendation or recommendations in terms of moving forward. So we'll keep you updated on that. And the last thing I want to mention is just what you've talked about as well, the legislative session that we're in, and things are happening quick. It's pretty amazing the speed with which some things are happening. I know in years past sometimes we would have a report from that podium where House numbers and bill numbers and Senate numbers were shared, and it just kind of would even make my head spin sometimes. So I'm going to just make some general comments and then direct not only you but everybody in our district to our website that, again, we're trying to give links and update those. Maggie gave me an update again today that we're putting up there so you can see what's happening and hopefully what the impact is. One of the things that's going to happen right away this next week is they're going to start to work the big tax bills, and that's very important to us because if it doesn't work out just right and we lose more revenue, as big a part as we are of the state's budget, it would be critical to us if they have to reduce us some of those. So those tax bills are going to be very important. Another one that has just come out, and you're starting to hear if you're following some of it, it will be the change in the at-risk definition. And again, as a district, I've been one that's always said, we're open to that. We recognize that maybe there's a better definition, but we need to figure that out before we just stop it at a certain point and we lose the money that we have in place. But right now, the consideration is being given that you would still use free and reduced lunch up to grade 3, and then from then on, it would be based on proficiency. So play that out. You've got a kid that has some needs, and we get a little bit of at-risk money to put a program in place to help them. The minute they get over that border, that line that says now they're okay, the programs go away. That support that the student still needs goes away. So you could almost have a cycle then where they fall below it and they need more help, and then you might get a little bit of money and you can help those students again. So we're going to watch that one carefully because it would be a huge impact financially on our district. The reading proficiency one is another one just in general that says you'll retain students who are not reading at the proficient level or above at 3rd grade. Again, a lot of implications for our district, and we're in better shape by far than a lot of districts. But we want to watch that one. Research does not support that in terms of what happens to those kids. Something that we're looking at just released today, but we're hoping it'll be positive, is that the governor has asked for mediation in the school court case. So that'll be interesting how that might play out, but saying let's let's do something for the good of Kansas and school kids across the state and see if we can't get this resolved and not have to let it go on. So real positive about that. Something else that is coming out of House Education that we learned about, and this again illustrates the speed with which something comes out and starts to get debated next Monday or Tuesday, and that's this rule that we continue to hear about. 65% of our money needs to go into the classroom. And it's so interesting when we talk about the origin of that and what it means, and good districts in Johnson County that aren't close to that 65%, but they do wonderful things. But this bill now says that if you're not at 65%, of your money going to the classroom, that there would be a public violation that we have to post in our official newspaper and on our website. And in the second year, they would penalize us that amount of money that we don't have into particular classrooms. So anyway, a lot of things happening, a lot of bills coming out that we'll want to be cognizant of and watch it. But we'll share stuff on our website. That's the best place to go right now and give updates.
You know, the 65% in the classroom, I don't mean to interrupt, but that also includes all this money that we're using, bond money and everything else for building schools and all of that, right?
Yeah.
And to our point again, and I just wanted to bring that up, for the fact that we continue to grow, I mean, that's why it makes us, even though we are doing outstanding things, that puts us in a very, very bad position because we're only one of the very few districts that are growing. And so we have a lot of that money that's not hitting that.
That plays into that same definition when you talk about a per pupil cost. And some of them are way higher than others. Well, again, if we spend money on bond issues and so forth, that gets added into the per pupil cost in that one definition. And so it looks like ours is a lot higher, but it's because of that.
Is that all you have tonight? Okay. For executive session, I know that we'll need at least 45 minutes for a personnel matter. Do you have any other items to add?
I need about 10 minutes. I don't know if you need to add that or if it can come in part of that.
An hour.
Yes.
I'd move that the board adjourn to executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel matters of non-elected personnel, discuss matters relating to employer-employee negotiations, and for preliminary discussion relating to the acquisition of real property, and that the board will return to the regular meeting at, what?
9:40.
9:45 or 9:40?
I think
9:40 in this room. The executive session is required in order to protect the privacy and interests of the individuals to be discussed for the purpose of protecting the district's right to the confidentiality of its negotiating position and protect the district's financial interest and bargaining position.
Second. Ms. Hibbs, I have a motion by Mr. Poland and a second by Ms. Felter. Would you call the roll, please?
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Mrs. Felter?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Poland?
Yes.
Mr. Shear?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.